Garvey talking about Georgia preachers. There were something like 26 branches of Garvey's organization here in Georgia. This makes Georgia something like about 12 or so among the various states, 26. I have a list of the names here. Many of these places, of course, are places that I don't know, but I'll read them because, you know, those of you who are native Georgians might be familiar with these kinds of places. And I mentioned earlier that there were more branches of Garvey's movement in the South than any place else. And that many of them were not only in large cities like Atlanta, but you know, they were spread across the countryside and so on. So let me give you an idea of some of the places in Georgia that had branches of Garvey's organization. Like I said, maybe some of you may recognize these places. I obviously am not familiar with them. In some cases, I might even pronounce them wrong. Alma, Atlanta, Baker County, Baxley, Brunswick, Camilla, Charity Grove, Clyadeville, Coverdale, Fitzgerald. Like I said, most of these places I've never heard of. Gardy, G-A-R-D-I, Halo, H-A-Y-L-O-W, Jessup, Kingsborough, Limerick, Moultrie, Oakfield, Patterson, Fuller, Powelton, Savannah, Shingler, Sylvester, a place called Tai Tai, T-Y-T-Y. Okay. Waycross, and there were 2 chapters in Waycross. So these are the places then where there were, you know, branches of the Garvey movement here in Georgia. It was here in Georgia, unfortunately, in Atlanta as a matter of fact, as you know, that Garvey was incarcerated. And the government finally caught up with him and put him in jail in 1925. It was here in the federal penitentiary in Atlanta that Garvey spent almost 3 years. It was from right here in Atlanta that Garvey was deported to the Caribbean via New Orleans. They put him on a train or whatever and took him straight to New Orleans, put him on a boat, and sent him back to Jamaica, 1928, December 1928. And you know, since we celebrated Garvey's centenary, his 100th birthday a couple of years ago, there were many calls during that time for Garvey, you know, for Garvey's name to be cleared, because all historians now are agreed that Garvey went to jail unjustly, that Garvey was sent to jail for political reasons. And Congressman Charles Rangel of New York, as a matter of fact, in 1987, introduced a bill into Congress calling upon the government of this country to exonerate Garvey, to clear his name. And last night we were talking, you know, as I was at a radio station, and it suddenly occurred to me that it might be a good idea, since in Atlanta now you have a black administration, it might be a good idea for one of these black administrations to also perhaps at some point go on record, since Garvey was jailed here in Atlanta. It might be very appropriate for one of these administrations to go on record as deploring the fact that Garvey was incarcerated here in Atlanta. And again, perhaps, you know, calling upon the government to clear his name. I think such a call coming from Atlanta would have a very great weight. And Atlanta would seem to be an appropriate place because it has a black administration. So that's something to think about. One of the most beautiful passages ever written by any of our leaders was written by Garvey out of Atlanta. And I think that this would be a very appropriate place for me to end my remarks by quoting this very moving passage of Garvey's, a passage which we sometimes refer to as the If I Die in Atlanta speech. It's a speech which I know that many of you would be familiar with. It appears in a variety of books. It first appeared in the Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey. Garvey was saying in effect that if they killed him in jail in Atlanta, that would not be the end of the struggle, because as we often say, you can kill a person, but you can't kill an idea. And Garvey was saying that if they killed him in jail, he would come back and haunt the oppressor. He would always be there in spirit. He would come back in the whirlwind of the storm, he said, to lead us to freedom, justice, and equality. So let me end by quoting this very moving, at least a portion of this very moving passage. What better place to quote such a passage than right here in Atlanta? If I die in Atlanta. Quote, if I die in Atlanta, my work shall then only begin, but I shall live in the physical or spiritual to see the day of Africa's glory. When I am dead, wrap the mantle of the red, black, and green around me. For in the new life I shall rise with God's grace and blessing to lead the millions up the heights of triumph with the colors that you know so well. Look for me in the whirlwind of the storm. Look for me all around you. For with God's grace I shall come and bring with me countless millions of black slaves who have died in America and the West Indies, and the millions in Africa, to aid you in the fight for liberty, freedom, and life. Thank you very much.
Then we invite you to join us at the bookstore, which is 2 doors down, for the book signing. Are there any questions right now?
Kind of way to research some of those movements and some of those places, Savannah, that's home.
Yes, I mean, there are many ways in which you could go about researching them. For one thing, you could locate newspapers from that era published in or near those places. And usually, it's not that difficult to find those newspapers. Many of them might be available on microfilm from the large university libraries around here, for example, perhaps even from a large public library. And usually librarians are very cooperative. If you tell them what you want, very often they will research. They know where to look to find which newspapers exist, and they'll tell you where they exist. Very often, librarians will even get them for you. There's something they call interlibrary loans. So you might go to, say, a librarian here in Atlanta, and the newspaper you want may be in, say, Savannah. And they'll arrange for you to come right here, right here and so on. There are a variety of archives that you can look at as well. Of course, you can go to those places, talk to old people. Once you ask around, almost everywhere I've been, if I've asked around, usually there's been some old person who was in the movement, or whose father or mother was in the movement. Like I said, there are bound to be state archives here in Georgia somewhere. I don't know where they are, but there are bound to be state archives, and they will have information as well. And there are many other areas, but these are some of the places that you could start. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Earlier in your speech, you made mention of influences on great black leaders' lives when they were young. As a Garvey scholar, what would you say are the most salient influences on Garvey's life to make him the great leader of Africans that he was?
It's always difficult, Historians always speculate. It's always difficult, There's such a complex mix that goes into the making of any individual. It's always very difficult to isolate any one variable. I could mention a few things. Garvey read very widely as a young boy, and we are told that his favorite topic was our history. And he read, black history, a lot of black history. One of his favorite characters in history was Toussaint Louverture, the man who led the Haitian Revolution, one of the great heroes of the African race. In one of the earliest pamphlets that Garvey wrote in 1915, he mentions a whole list of famous black historians who he calls upon his followers to read. People like Edward Wilmot Blyden from Liberia. He even mentions Du Bois, interestingly enough, at that time, as a black historian who his followers should read and so on. So I can mention that. He also came into contact with Pan-Africanists. There was a Pan-Africanist in Jamaica by the name of Dr. J. Robert Love. And Love, by the way, had been an associate of Bishop Turner here in Georgia many years earlier. And Love is somebody that Garvey actually, it is said, took lessons from in public speaking, lessons in public speaking. So Love was another person who influenced Garvey as well. Garvey also, he moved around a lot. He was a person always receptive to new experiences. He was involved in labor unions. He was a printer, of course, so he came in contact with the written word a lot. The town where he lived, St. Anne's Bay, was a seaport at that time, where banana boats and so on came, so he might have met people from all over the place. So these are some of the influences, but like I said, it's very difficult to decide which was the most important. Yeah. Yeah.
Sheikh Mark Sarah studied with in London. I recall reading his book he studied in London with some Sheikh from Africa.
Oh, you mean Dusay Muhammad Ali? Dusay Muhammad Ali.
I don't know his name.
Yes. He didn't study with Ali. When he was in London from 1912 to 1914, he worked for a magazine called the African Times and Orient Review, a Pan-African magazine which was edited by this African called Dusay Muhammad Ali. This was one of the leading Pan-African magazines of the day, an excellent magazine, and all the major Pan-Africanists and major intellectual figures in the black world, major political figures, they all wrote in this magazine or were written about by other people. And many of these kinds of folks, when they visited London, would come by the offices of the magazine. So